Hi there, GoPro Flying here, and thank you for joining me for another video. Before I start talking about the content of this particular video, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of you who watched my previous video and for all of the comments and suggestions that you gave me. Most of them seem to be for RT or comms. A lot of you want to know how to speak on the radio, what's the best way to talk to air traffic control, what to say, who to speak to, in what order to say things. That's a really good idea. I wasn't at all expecting anyone to mention comms. However, in thinking about it, one of the things that frightens off most people when it comes to PPL flying is the radio. Learning to fly the aircraft is one thing, but learning to fly the radio and talk to air traffic control are two very different things. I've also had requests about doing navigation, how to navigate, how to use a plog, how to plan a flight from A to B. That's absolutely a fantastic idea. Navigation is one of my biggest subjects that I teach, so I've got no issues whatsoever in doing that. I've also had a request from someone to do a video on air law. Good luck with that. Air law is not really a subject that anyone likes to talk about or to teach, but it is a very important subject, a critically important subject that all pilots need to understand in quite a wealth of detail. Rest assured that whatever your suggestions are, I'll do my best to try and get a video out at some point in the future covering every single aspect of PPL and above CPL flying as well, as much as I can when time permits. So thank you all of you for your suggestions, thank you for the nice comments of encouragement. If there's anything you'd like me to discuss, any videos you'd like me to make, please go ahead, put something in the comments section, let me know what you'd like me to talk about, and I'll see what I can do when I get round to it. So, money. It's the one thing that links all of us together in aviation. It's the passion to fly, it's the want to be a pilot, but it's that dreaded feeling of knowing how much it's going to cost you. And the UK, of all places, is no exception. Probably one of the most expensive places in the world to learn to fly, unfortunately. And it's something you just have to accept. There's really no way around it. Even if you're lucky enough to get onto an integrated course, a sponsored scheme, if you will, with the likes of Flybe or British Airways, you're still going to be required to fork out a staggering amount of money up front. The MPL courses currently running for EasyJet and the likes of Virgin that CTC did a while back were costing the individual students upwards of £100,000. Now most people prefer to go the modular route because the modular route is much cheaper, assuming that you do everything to minimum requirements. On paper at least, you can do a PPL, CPL, multi-engine IR and MCC on a modular route for about £45,000–50,000. If you do an integrated course, you'll be lucky to do it for less than £80,000, and some places will charge you, as I say, in excess of 100 grand. Note that does not include type ratings, depending on the airline you go to, which can cost you upwards of £20,000 on top of the cost of all your flight training. And don't forget that the cost of your training usually does not include living expenses. So you have to add on at least 1.5 or 2 years of living expenses, which can cost you an absolute fortune if you haven't budgeted for it. So why do I want to talk about money? What's the reason for making this video? The reason for making this video is very simple. About a week ago, 2 weeks ago, just after I made the previous video, I was having a bit of a clean out. I've got a big file of facts in my room at home with lots and lots of receipts, tax returns and all this stuff that I always just dump paperwork into whenever I don't want to throw it away and I want to keep it for a while. But I've also got a bit of a habit of holding on to things just in case I might need it one day. I'm not quite a hoarder yet, but when it comes to paperwork to do with finances, I do like to keep hold of all copies of receipts and paperwork just to be on the safe side. Now while I was going through it, I found a huge amount of receipts from when I did my PPL. I've known about them for years and they've always been in my folder, but I've never looked at them, I've never gone through them, and I've never added them up to see how much they came to. So I thought, before I throw them away, which I will be doing soon, that maybe it was a good idea to go through them and to actually add up the cost of all of my flights and all of the additions to accessories that I bought, just for the PPL, just to see exactly how much money my PPL costs. Because off the top of my head, I actually don't know. I paid for my PPL over 3.5 years, and as a result, it was a couple of £100 this week, then nothing for a couple of months, and then maybe £50 one week, and then £700 the week after that. I never really kept a total. So what I had was this plastic wallet, which was full of receipts, and I went through it last week and I took out all the receipts that I had, and I've got a big wad of them here, and these are all the receipts that I have. Lots and lots and lots and lots of receipts from PPL and from my hours building. And I went through and I added them up, and I was pretty impressed at how much some of these receipts were for and how much they cost. So I started thinking, well, maybe I could do a nice short video on just the cost of my PPL. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought there are so many hidden costs in flying that people don't even think about. And I think if you are planning to fly or wanting to fly, then understanding the cost that the course is actually going to cost you compared to the cost that you will be told by the flight training organisation that you go to is a really, really valuable understanding. To give you a very brief example, when I came to Bournemouth originally to do my ground school, the cost of my ground school, fully residential, was about £3,000, just over. Now, I had plenty of money in my account, so I budgeted for £3,000. I had about £9,000 or £10,000 in my account at the time, so I thought £3,000, a couple of £1,000 for the living expenses. I'll have plenty left over when I finish. But by the time I got to the end of the year, I barely had £200 left in my bank account. And the reason for that was just not necessarily hidden costs by the company, but just the costs of everyday living: petrol, tax, road insurance, car insurance, rent, food, going out, all the things that you just don't consider when you look at the cost of a course. So I thought that what I'd do is very briefly have a quick chat with you about the cost of flying, the real cost of flying. This video is going to be mainly aimed at PPL students. However, towards the end of the video, I will show you a couple of receipts for when I got to the end of my training towards my CPL, multi-engine IR and MCC, just to give you some really hair-raising costs that you really need to consider. So, you want to do a PPL, you've decided you want to fly. Congratulations. What now? Where do you go? Do you just turn up to a flying school and say, I want to fly? No. One of the most important things that any new pilot really, really needs to understand is, in order to fly, you need to be fairly medically fit. Now, to get a PPL in the UK, you need a medical certificate, and we call this one a second class medical. If you want a PPL, you need to have a second class. If you want to continue to do a CPL, that is a commercial pilot's license and above, you need to get a first class medical. Now, these are obviously not cheap. The second class medical will set you back around about £150 to £200 perhaps, and obviously any tests on top of that which you require will cost you a lot more money. Now, it's very valuable to get the medical before you even consider doing any of your training. There's no point in spending thousands of pounds on flight training only to get ready to go solo to be told you need a second class medical. Off you go to the aeronautical medical examiner, and they tell you, sorry, you've got an unknown condition, you cannot get a medical. You need to know in advance whether you can fly or not, and I'd recommend any single person watching this video that has any genuine intention of becoming an airline pilot or going beyond the commercial pilot's license route, before you do anything whatsoever, go to Gatwick, get a first class medical, before you do anything. Because if you can't get a medical, you'll never fly. You need to get your medical ASAP. As I say, the second class medical will cost you around about £150 to £200, depending on your personal circumstances. If you want a second, that was second class medical, if I said that correctly. Second class will set you back around about £175 on average. A first class medical will set you back around about £245, £250. Now, if you have any long-standing medical conditions which require extra tests, that can cost a lot more money. To give you an example, I had heart surgery about 12 years ago, and as a result, my medical cost me well over £450. It also took me nearly 10 months between having the medical and getting the medical in the post. So first things first, you're going to have to spend several £100s, not only on the medical itself, but you've also got to consider the cost of driving down to Gatwick. to get the medical in the first place. If you've got a medical early in the morning to beat the traffic, you probably want to be best at going over there the night before and perhaps stay in a hotel or a B&B for the night. Yet again, more cost. So, you've decided you're going to do a PPL and you've successfully managed to get yourself either a first or a second class medical. What next? Do you just turn up to the flying school and fly? Well, no. One thing that I would highly recommend to all of you, no matter how much you love flying, is I would seriously recommend that you have a trial lesson. Now, most of you that want to be an airline pilot have probably been on holiday, you've been on 737s, 747s, 777s, A320s, maybe even A380s, and you know you love flying. Flying's a fantastic thing to do. However, very few people have ever been in a small, light aircraft. Very few of you have been in Pipers or Cessnas. Now, you've got to remember that you're going to be doing well over 200 hours of basic training in a light aircraft, a PA-28, a Cessna 152. They are very, very different from flying the big jets. And as a result, they can be quite turbulent, quite twitchy, and quite a lot of people that fly them for the first couple of times actually don't really like the experience, and they feel a bit queasy, a bit sick, or even scared. So I'd highly recommend you spend some time investing some money in having at least 1 or 2 trial lessons just to see whether or not you actually enjoy it. You might be quite surprised. The problem with doing that is it's going to cost you. How much is it going to cost you? Well, that's going to depend on where you go and how long you have a lesson for. The average cost of a dual lesson for an hour in the UK is about £140 to £180 an hour. So if you're going to have 1 or 2 hours, that is again quite a substantial cost. But it's better to spend a couple of £100 now than spend thousands and thousands of pounds later on and realise it's not really for you. So, you've decided to fly, you've found a flying school, you've got your medical, and you've had a trial lesson and you absolutely love it, and you've decided that flying is definitely what you want to do. Now, in theory, you turn up to the flying school and you just start flying. You find an instructor, you tell them what you want to do, and then they stick you in an aircraft, and then you start learning the basics of flying, the basics of control surfaces, the basics of stability, the basics of how to taxi, how to take off, how to climb, and how to fly in straight and level flight, how to climb, descend, and turn. That's wonderful. Unfortunately, there's a lot more to it that you're probably not aware. Now, on my right-hand side, just off camera, I've got a list of all the things that I had to buy prior to starting my PPL. And I'm going to go through all of those now, just to give you an idea of the things that you're going to need. So, number 1, critical. Calculator. Now, this is a Casio FX83 GT. The CAA recommendations are that you need a Casio FX83 or a Casio FX85. They're not expensive, but you do need one of these, and it has to be on the approved list of calculators which can be found on the CAA website. This was about £10, not expensive, but it's still £10 I bet you thought you wouldn't have to spend. Next, we have, what order should we do this in? Pens. Pens. You need lots and lots of pens. You're going to be marking lots of routes on your maps, and you're going to need an awful lot of proper permanent or non-permanent markers to mark your maps. Now, whether you go for the Stabilo or the Stedler pens, it doesn't matter. They're not massively expensive, but they're also not particularly cheap. I've known some places selling 3 or 4 pens for up to £10 or £15. And again, you're going to be using these a lot, so you're going to end up having to buy multiple sets of these. So that's another cost you're going to have to consider. Next, you are going to need books. Lots and lots of books. Now, when I did my PPL back in 2008, 9, 10, we were under JAR, Joint Aviation Regulations, and the JAA stated that there were 7 PPL exams that you had to do, and therefore there were 7 books that you needed. And these cover all things from the basics of flying to this one, which is air law and meteorology. You've then got air navigation, radio navigation, and instrument flying, which you shouldn't really necessarily need for a PPL, to be honest. That's entirely up to you whether you buy that one. Human factors and pilot performance, that's to do with human biology and the effects of flying on the human body. RT, radio telephony, good book, very useful. And that's just another book on human performance. I don't have all the books here. There were 7, there's now 9, because now we've gone to EASA, which is the European Aviation Safety Agency. They have split some of the subjects into 2 separate subjects, so we now have 9 subjects, which means 9 books. I actually think there's only 8 books because I think 2 of the subjects are still mixed together. Either way, these books cost £23 each. 23 times 8 is a lot of money. Not forgetting that once you've studied these books in glorious detail, you then have to take an exam. Now, I don't know how much the exams are nowadays. I think they're about £30. When I did them, they were £25 each. So not only are you spending £23 on the books, but you've also got to spend £25 on the exam for each subject. And if you fail, you've got to take it again. Okay? So 8 times 23 is £184. Again, more cost that you probably didn't consider. Okay, next we have VFR flight logs. This is called a VFR flight log. Sometimes they're called plogs. It's basically a pilot log, and it enables you to write down waypoints, headings, tracks, speeds, and all that kind of stuff that you're going to need when you start doing navigation. The beauty with these is that they're very, very cheap. You can buy a pad with about 20 sheets on it for about £3 or £4, but you will need at least 2 or 3 pads throughout the rest of your training. Next, we have something extremely important, which is the chart. This is called a Lambert conformal conic projection, and it is a UK CAA 1 in half a million chart. So scale is 1 to 500,000, and this is the kind of chart that you're going to be using to do all of your flying. They're not cheap. That's a lie. They are cheap. They're not expensive. They're only about £15, but you do have to upgrade them every single year. Usually March or April is when the new ones come out. So £15 every year, potentially for the rest of your life. Okay, what do we have next? Next we have checklists. Now these checklists are my personal checklists, which I use for flying here in the PA-28s and the Robins. These are very simplified checklists which are used, basically pieces of A4 paper that have been laminated to make them nice and weatherproof. You can buy proper official Piper and Cessna checklists. Every flying school sells them, and they'll cost you about 10 quid. Again, not a huge amount of money. Most flying schools provide checklists for you, but it's definitely worth having a copy of your own checklist for each aircraft you fly, just to become familiar with the checklist for your particular type of aircraft. Not expensive, again, maybe 10 or 15 pounds for a good one, but it's still a cost that you may have to incur. Knee board. Now, a knee board is a very cool piece of kit. A knee board is basically a padded piece of, I don't know, cardboard, I guess. It's got a springy clip on the top, and the whole purpose of this is that you can strap it to your knee. And the idea is it sits on your leg, and you can put all of your plugs on here, and you can have all the information ready to hand. You've got a bit of space inside to put some approach charts in there, which are quite useful if you're doing a CPL or an IMC. You can also stick anything you want in there, and there's room in here to put your pens as well. Very, very good piece of kit. Absolutely, totally compulsory. Every pilot needs one of these. Lots of different versions available. This one was about, I don't know, £15, £20 perhaps. They do go up to about £30, £40 if you want a really good one. No idea which one you want to get. It's entirely up to you. Either way, it's still more money. Next, cheap stuff. This is called a square protractor. You put it on your map and you measure tracks. I'm not sure if this one's actually got any distances on it. Yes, it has. This one is designed specifically for the 1 in 500,000 scale. I don't know if you can see there, it says 1 in 500,000 just there. You can't see it, but that's what it says. So this is very cheap, costs about, I don't know, £5, £6, £7. Either way, virtually compulsory. You need one of these for navigation, something you need to be aware of. Next, this is what we call a plotter. This is a small device. Basically, it's a ruler. It's about 6 inches long, and you use this to measure angles and tracks for doing your diversions. If you're on your way from A to B and you have to do a diversion as part of your test, you use this plotter to figure out in which direction you need to fly from where you are to where you're going. Again, very, very cheap. Costs £5 or £6. You'll still need one, guarantee. I lost a couple of these on my PPL and ended up buying about 3 of them. And would you believe it, when I finished my PPL, I found every single one of them. So I've got 3 of them now. Next, this big ruler. This one is a 16-inch ruler which is used to measure distances on the 1 1/2 mil charts. Now, the reason it's so big is because some of the distances that you're going to be flying can be very, very long, and you don't want to have to draw a straight line from A to B in multiple legs. You just get one big 16-inch ruler, and hopefully you can do it in one go. On one side of the ruler, it's graduated with 1 in half a million scale, and on the other side, it's graduated with 1 in 250,000 scale. So when you do use one of these, make sure you use the right side. Cost, no idea, £8, £9, £10, something like that. Again, not hugely expensive, but that's a lot and lots of £10 that we've been adding up now. And as you'll see towards the end of the video, these costs do add up a lot. Next, you'll need a logbook. Now this is my logbook. This is a small PPL logbook, and as you can see in it, you put all of your flights and all the information regarding all the flying that you've done. If I move it over there, you can see this is where you log all of your flights, your takeoff times, your landing times, the total time that you flew for, who your instructor was, comments about the flight, what you did, where you took off from, where you're going, and you'll definitely need one of these for flying both PPL and CPL. Now the PPL logbooks from my piece of paper here tell me, where is it? Blah, 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 Plogs, logbook. The PPL logbooks are about £10. The CPL logbooks, which are a bit bigger, are about £15 to £20. Now, one of these should last you absolutely years and years and years, depending on how often you fly. Again, they're not expensive, but you still need one. What next? This wonderful piece of kit. This is called a navigation computer. This specific one is called the CRP5. Now for PPL, you only need the smaller version of this, which is called the CRP1. It is basically it's an analog calculator, really. It's a circular slide rule, for those of you who remember slide rules. It's a wonderful piece of kit, and it enables you to do lots and lots of magic. It enables you on this side to calculate winds, headings, tracks, drift, wind velocities, and on this side it enables you to do virtually everything in the world. On this one you can work out ram rise as a function of kinetic heating of the air, you can work out true altitudes, you can work out density altitudes, you can convert units of kilograms to pounds to litres to imperial gallons, US gallons. You can work out specific gravities on it, masses, weights, distances, speed, distance, time. You can do multiplication, you can do division, you can do ratios, fractions. This thing is really a fantastic piece of kit and is also compulsory. You have to have one. Now the CRP1, the small one used for the PPL, is not expensive, but it's about £40 to £45. When you come to do your ground school, to do your ATPL ground school, you are required to have a CRP5 and nothing else. Now these are not cheap. For what is effectively a piece of plastic, this is £75, okay? And it is absolutely compulsory. You have to have one. And not only do you have to have one, you've got to know how to use it. Very, very good bit of kit. If you're doing a PPL with the intention of doing a CPL, you might want to say to your flying school, can I please have a CRP5 to start with? Because forking out 45 quid for a CRP1 and then another £75 for a CRP5, which is virtually exactly the same thing but bigger with 1 or 2 extra pieces on it, is a lot of money to spend. Now as it happens, I lost my CRP1 when I did my PPL. I have no idea how, probably left it in the aircraft, never found it again, so I had to buy another one, only to come here to Bournemouth to be told I've got to buy the CRP5, which is going to cost me 75 quid. Not cheap at all, but you need one. Definitely a cost you need to be aware of. One thing I'll mention is a bag. Now this is my personal bag I use for flying. It's got lots and lots of pockets in it used for putting all my stuff in for when I go flying. You can use any bag you want. There's no requirement to have any specific type of bag. If you want to use a carrier bag from a supermarket, go ahead. Most people prefer to buy kind of pilot briefcases or whatever. They vary in price across the internet from £20 up to £80. So that's a cost that, again, you're going to have to think about, because there's an awful lot of stuff that you're going to need to take with you every single time you go flying, and you're certainly not going to be able to carry it all by hand. I think the last thing I really want to talk about is headsets. Now when you start your PPL, you won't be required to have a headset. It's a big cost to incur. So what most people like to do is get into flying, get up to perhaps flying solo, which takes around about 15 to 20 hours on average. And once you've done 20, 25, 30 hours, you might want to consider buying your own headset, because there will come a point at which your school will start to insist that you buy your own headset. Now, this is probably the single most expensive piece of kit you'll need to buy for your PPL. This is a Sennheiser HME 110. I bought it about 6 years ago, and it cost me £245 plus postage. They're still 240 quid to this day. They're not cheap. They're definitely not top of the range by any stretch. Some people like to really go to town on their headsets. If you get a top of the range Sennheiser or Bose or Lightspeed Zulu, you can be talking very close to £1,000 for a headset. £700, £800, £900 for a really good active noise reducing headset. The average person, I guess, spends around about £300, £350 on their first headset. So what does this mean? What it means is that you can potentially spend, assuming a headset of £350 and including your medical, which don't forget your medical needs to be upgraded every single year if it's a first class medical. So that's another 150, 160 quid for the renewal every 12 months for the rest of your life. You've spent £1,000 and you haven't even gotten an aeroplane yet. That's what it means. Okay? Flying is extremely expensive. Once you start flying, you're going to be looking at a dual cost of anything between £160 an hour to £240 an hour, depending on where you go. Multiply that by a minimum of 45 hours, and that gives you an idea of how much your flying is going to cost you. Plus the £1,000 you've already spent before you started flying. You've then got to consider that when you start doing your navigation flights, you're going to have to land away at multiple airports. When I did my PPL, the airfields we used to land at on a regular basis were Duxford, Bourne in Cambridgeshire, Norwich and Southend. And every time you land at another airport in the UK, you have to pay landing fees. Now here at Bournemouth, the PPL students disappear off to places like Bristol, Cardiff, Exeter and Gloucester. And again, the landing fees there can be anything from £10, £15 all the way up to well in excess of £50, £60 to land. Shoreham, not too far down the road from here, I think they charge about 30 quid for a landing fee now. So again, don't just look at the cost of flying, look at the cost of having to drive to the airport, look at the cost of the food when you land, look at the cost of the landing fee, plus the cost of the flight itself. And don't forget, when it comes to the end of your license, you'll have to have a test. This test is called a skills test. And the skills test usually is one of the most single expensive parts of all of your training, with the exception of probably your PPL cross-country flight or your CPL cross-country flight, which will comfortably set you back at least £400, £500, £600. Now, the skills test, it varies from person to person. I'll show you an example in a minute of my CPL and IR skills test cost. But the PPL skills test, you'll be looking at the cost of the aircraft for the duration of the test, which is going to be something around about maybe £250, £300, plus the examiner's cost. Now, all examiners charge their own personal fee for a skills test, which is usually around about £170, which you have to consider. But we're not finished. Why? Because let's say many months down the line, congratulations, you've passed your skills test. You've now got to send off your license to the CAA, and they will charge you for the privilege. I don't know what the exact cost of a PPL license issue is now, but you'll definitely want to send it off first class recorded post to make sure that it gets there safe, because you have to send off your logbook as well, and that's something you certainly do not want to lose. I'd also recommend, just as a side note, to take photographs of your logbook on a regular basis, or at least photocopy it or have a digital copy online, just to make sure that if you ever lose your logbook, you've lost all trace that you've ever done any flying, which is not good at all. So the CAA, I think, charge around about, from memory, it's about 180 quid, I think, something around about 150 for the license issue, which again is more cost. This is the kind of thing we're talking about when it comes to aviation. The amount of money you see on paper as to the cost of a course is usually only about 60 or 70% of the cost of the actual course itself. Now, when you get on to do things like the CPL, the multi-engine, the IR, it's exactly the same. There's always hidden costs involved somewhere down the line. Now, we've covered everything you need for the PPL, and what I'd like to do now is go through the receipts, this wad of receipts that I showed you earlier. And I'm going to go through these literally one by one. And I know this is going to be potentially quite a boring few minutes of this video, but I think it's really, really important for you who maybe haven't started flying yet, or you've just started and you're questioning how much it's going to cost you. I want to go through these receipts one by one and just give you an idea of every single time I went flying. And before I do that, I just want to point out my personal circumstances when I did my PPL. I was in my mid-20s, I was living away from home, I was paying quite expensive rent at the time for what was effectively a terrible house I was living in. I was having to commute a round trip of about 15 miles to the airfield. I had a job which paid me about £18,000 a year, so I was working long hours. I was getting paid not a huge amount of money, especially after tax and national insurance were taken into account. I had a very, very brief and basic social life, which didn't cost me a lot of money, if I'm honest. But I had rent to pay, I had bills to pay, I had council tax to pay, I had a car to run, I had petrol, I had road tax, I had car insurance, and trying to do a PPL on that kind of salary was extremely difficult. So please take that into consideration when I show you these receipts, just to understand how difficult it can be for some people to learn to fly financially. Right, here we go. Okay, let's begin. £142, £84, £224, £240, £182, £140, £308, £420, £168, £189.98, £126, £154, £73.50, £119, £337.50, £151.90. Oops, what was that one? That was £140, that one was. This is £168, £932. So that's a single flight of nearly £1,000. £210, £190, 50 pence. What's that one? £69, £237.50, £168, £144, £300, £132, 8 pence, and another £132, 8. And just note the dates are different on these, so they are not the same flight. Where's the date? There we go. That was the 2nd of June 2013, and that one is the 24th of June 2013. So different flights, both of over £132. £91.44, £184.48, £137.64, £312, £63, another £63. Again, they do have different dates on them, so they're not the same flight. When was that one? That was the 3rd of the 10th, and that one was the 1st of the 3rd, I think. £98. What's that one? That one is £224. Next we have, what was that one? Another £98. £197.20. £168. This one is £155. £196. £164. £140. £123.50. £154. £243. £229.50. £229.50 again, two different dates, not the same flight. £126. £168. £182. £154. £224. £210. £155. £165. £191.57. £330.30. £261.23. £222.70. £137.64. £262.50. £237.50. £475. 176, 119 and £139.70. Now, I would just like to point out that all of these receipts that you've seen are just a fraction of all the receipts that I probably had. These are only the ones that I kept. I paid a lot of my flying over the phone or over the internet, so I don't have receipts for those. The cost of these receipts alone, I added up, and they came to £13,234.73. Now, that was just the cost of some of the flights themselves, and again, it was a fraction of all the flights that I did for my PPL and my hours building. Now, what you don't see in there is the cost of all the landing fees as well, which can comfortably add at least a couple of £100 on top, plus all the other flights that I don't have receipts for. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the really expensive stuff, the CPL, the multi-engine, the IR, and the MCC. When you do your multi-engine rating in the UK, you'll do it in one of three different types of aircraft. It will be in either a Beechcraft Duchess, it will be in a Piper Seneca, or it will be in a DA-42. No matter what school you go to, they all charge a lot of money for flying instruments. You're going to be looking at around about, give or take, I don't know the cost of all schools, but the average is about £500 an hour. That's 500 British pounds an hour. And you're required to do upwards of 50 hours, which is why the instrument rating is the one thing, at least financially, that most people dread when it comes to their training. It's extremely expensive. And on top of that, you've then got what are now virtually compulsory items such as the multi-crew cooperation, the MCC, which is about 2,000, £2,500 depending on where you go, and then the jet orientation course, or a JOC as it's called. That's usually, again, about 1,000, 1,500 quid, 2,000 maybe. You can usually get a joint MCC JOC for about £2,500, £3,000 if you're lucky. But be very careful, don't necessarily go to the cheapest place you can find. When it comes to something like an MCC JOC, it really is critical that you get what you pay for, and the more money, generally speaking, is the better way to go about it. So what I want to do now is show you two things, and these two things are these are just a couple of receipts. Now, these receipts are just the final statements that I got when I finished my advanced training. And again, this is one page of just a couple of weeks worth of flying. This is not all of it by any stretch of the imagination. But I just want to show you how expensive some of these flying costs can actually be. First of all, what I'm going to show you is just this. This is just one that I had a line around, and this is just a copy of some of the flights that I took when I was doing my CPL, and on it these are dates from March 2014 all the way down to May 2014. So we've only got about 2 months worth of flying on here, and the total cost of that was £3,265, which included the flying for my training and also some hours building that I did while I was down here. Again, just something to be aware of. Now, the last thing I want to show you, which is going to be the big eye-opener, is this. This again is a receipt from when I did my instrument rating, right at the end of my training. At the end of 2013, I got a statement from the company I did my training with, and I asked them in the very last week just to send me the finalised bill. Now, the finalised bill for 1 week's flying, okay, note on there, I don't know if you can see there, the dates are, what's that, 21st of November 2013 all the way down to the, is it 21st? It's 21st of the 11th 2013 all the way down to the 13th of the 11th. This was basically, or the 13th to the 21st, I guess it should be. And this was for the last week of my flying. The total cost of these flights alone came to a staggering £6,251. Okay, this stuff is really, really expensive. I just want to break this down just to give you an idea. I'm actually looking at this in the screen on the camera and everything's backwards, so I'll do my best to explain. Here we have, I've called it a mock test. The mock test is basically what we call the 170. Before you do a skills test with an instructor, it's best that you go up with a qualified instructor or an examiner and have effectively a mock exam. So you get put through your paces before you actually do the test to make sure that there's nothing that you're a little bit rusty on that you need a little bit of help with, because you definitely don't want to deliberately fail an exam if you can help it. So before you do any skills test for PPL, CPL, multi-engine or IR, what you'll do is go with an instructor and do a full test flight effectively, just to see if everything's okay. Now that alone for me cost £1,205 for one flight. It was a 2.4 hour flight at about £500 an hour. So the single mock exam alone cost me 1,200 quid. I then had the actual CAA flight exam. Now, this is something you also need to be aware of. When you do a test, I said earlier in this video that the CAA examiner for your PPL usually charges their own personal examination fee. For a PPL, it's around about £150 to £200. However, when you do your CPL or your instrument rating, you have to contact CAA flight test bookings, and they will send an approved examiner to your flight school to test you. The CAA's test fee just to send you an examiner is £785, and I've got it right there in black and white. If you can see it, you can see there. Exam, CAA, flight exam, 785 quid. That's just for the examiner. You then have to pay for the cost of the test on top of that, which again, for a 2.5 hour flight test for an instrument rating can be well over £1,000 comfortably. So that test alone can set you back £1,200, £1,300, £1,400 plus the £800 for the examiner. And if you pass, you've then got to go and send off the licenses to the CAA, which is going to set you back another couple of £100. This is stuff that gets really, really expensive. So on here, what have we got next? Now, the actual test was there. Right, what you can see here is something that I'm not overly proud to admit, but oh well, no one's perfect. Exam CAA flight exam partial. Now, on my instrument rating, I had a very, very good flight. I was told to go from Bournemouth to Shoreham. Never done the flight in my entire life. It wasn't on one of the test routes that we did. Not an issue. Went to Shoreham, did the NDB approach. You do the procedural NDB approach, and then you go out, do general handling, and back into Bournemouth after about 2 and a bit hours for a radar vectored ILS single engine back into Bournemouth. As we came into Bournemouth, the weather changed dramatically, and I unfortunately had a bit of a wobble literally in the aircraft, or with the aircraft should I say, on the approach. The unstable approach led to me losing the glide slope on the approach at about 1 mile from the airfield, and as a result, unfortunately I had to partial my IR. It was a simple retest. I just had to come back with the examiner about 2 days later, and I just took off. I did one circuit, a single radar vectored ILS back into Bournemouth, no problems. Now the problem with that was that I had to redo my test. At least I had to redo the bit that I partialed on, which was the approach. And on the approach, you can see there that there was a further fee of 500 and, is that 35? I can't see from here. £534. That £534 was again flight test bookings. So I have to phone the CAA. Hello, this is me. I've partialed my exam. Can I have another examiner for tomorrow, please, just to redo the little bit that I screwed up on? Absolutely, sir, not a problem. That'll be £534, please, plus the test of the aircraft for the partial, which for me, thankfully, was fairly short. It was only about 0.3, 0.4, which is about 24 minutes, just to do the bit that I screwed up on. But that 0.4, if you look there, it was 0.3 actually, between 1549 and 1607, sorry, 1549 and 1607, which was the flight test, 0.3 hours, still cost me £192.70 for basically 18 minutes flying. But on top of that 0.3, which is 18 minutes, you've then got to add 0.2 for taxi. So that was a very, very expensive retest, plus the cost of the aircraft. I've also there got the Shoreham landing fees. Even though I didn't land at Shoreham, you still have to pay an approach fee of £25. I then got my MCC at the bottom, which was another £2,000. So all in all, this 1 week cost me £6,200. And on top of this, again, you've got to send off for your licenses, which is more money. You've then got other things you really need to take into consideration. I mentioned earlier that you have to retake your medical every 12 months. So if you do plan on getting a first class medical, you need to renew it every single year. If you have a second class medical, it needs to be renewed every 5 years. And the other thing you need to take into consideration, which is probably going to upset you somewhat, is that if you do an instrument rating, if you don't keep it current by having a job with an airline, you need to update the multi-engine and the multi-engine rating and the instrument rating every single year. Now, it's currently October 2015 and my instrument rating renewal is due this December. That is going to cost me about £1,500, if not more. And again, as long as I'm not flying with an airline, I need to upgrade and update and renew my instrument rating, my multi-engine rating, every single year for the rest of my life. Now, once you get a job with an airline, the currency revalidates it. So every time you go flying, and you keep it current just by flying on a daily basis. So, with all that in mind, I hope this video has been useful to some of you, most of you, just to get an idea and just to get a flavour of some of the costs that are going to be incurred. And please don't forget that when you do your flying, there are so many other things I haven't discussed. Things like living expenses, things like in your ground school. When you do your ground school, the cost of the course might be £3,000 or £4,000. But don't forget, when you do your ATPL ground school, there are 14 subjects that you need to sit. You study 14 subjects, but what you're not told is that you actually have 14 exams at the end of it, which you can't do in-house. A few schools do Oxford CTC, but most other schools that do residential ground school or any school that does any form of distance learning, you have to go to Gatwick. You can go to a few places, to be honest, but most people go to Gatwick Airport, to the CAA headquarters, aviation house at Gatwick, and there you have to do your 14 exams. Those exams can cost you, I think they're about £68, £69 each at the minute. Your exam fees alone for the ground school are going to cost you the best part of £1,000. They're about £960, £70, £80, something like that. And on top of that, again, what you're not told is because you've got to go to Gatwick in multiple sittings, because most ground schools do their ground school in 3 phases. So you'll do the 14 subjects over 3 phases. So phase 1 you'll do 5 subjects, phase 2 you'll do 5 subjects, phase 3 you'll do 4 subjects. You have to go to Gatwick 3 times, which means 3 lots of petrol to and from Gatwick Airport. It also requires the £1,000 for the exam sittings, and it also is going to require every single sitting, usually at least 3 or 4 nights in a hotel around Gatwick. That alone can bump up the price of your ground school by nearly £2,000. Let alone if you're doing your ground school residential, you've got the cost of living away from home for 6, 7, 8 months, depending on how long your ground school is going to take you, which is 6, 7 or 8 months of rent, 6, 7 or 8 months of potentially bills, depending on where you're living, council tax, although you shouldn't really be paying council tax if you're a student, and then you've got all your social life, your food, your car. As I said to you earlier, when I did my ground school, the cost of the course on paper was £3,200, but by the end of the 8 months, I'd spent nearly 10 grand. So you've really got to be very, very careful about your commitment to aviation. If you're lucky enough to have lots of money, you've worked hard for it, your parents are willing to loan you the money, the bank's willing to give you the money, that's absolutely brilliant. But if you are, like me, paying for it yourself, you really need not to be sucked in, if you can help it, by all the nice flashy brochures and magazines telling you how cheap their courses are and how cheap they are relative to everyone else. I would err on the side of caution. Whatever you're told about the cost of any course, whether it's a PPL, ground school, CPL, multi-engine IR, take that price, add at least 50%, and then add a little bit on top. And that is almost certainly at least what you will pay. You need to be very, very aware of that. Now, I hope this video has been of some use. Thank you for watching. Keep me posted on what you want. Let me know in the comments section how useful this video was. Let me know your experiences if you've done PPL, CPL, multi-engine anywhere. Let me know how much it cost you. Tell me what you think of the channel, the video, and anything you'd like me to talk about in future. Stick it in the comment section, and I guarantee I will get back to you within a few days. Thanks very much. Have a good weekend.